Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to WatchBox, and thanks for logging on. He's Brian Gufberg. We are the team with the theme, and today that theme is Officine Panerai. Brian, let's jump straight in with a wrist check, and then we'll go to the watches.
So today I am wearing a Roger Dubuis Sympathy, 37 millimeters in size with the shaped crystal. This is a watch that I've worn on the show quite a bit in the past. Featuring a bi-retrograde perpetual calendar with moon phase, the watch has the signature shaped crystal that you see on many early Roger Dubuis watches. The watch itself, for me, is absolutely gorgeous. There's nothing like the Sympathy case anywhere else in the industry, and these early watches are all Geneva Seal certified, and again, they have a special charm to them.
It is truly gorgeous, and I think it's impressive that the watch is both a Besançon Observatory chronometer and Geneva hallmark. Now, of course, in these early Dubuis, all of the base movements were customer calibers, but each one was immensely customized to earn the Pension de Genève. The shaped sapphire of which Brian speaks, this is actually part of a case design that was originally conceived for Roger Dubuis back during the days when it was called Sogem. And a Vallée de Jeu case maker coined this initial shape. Now, the first ones were made with shaped bezel sapphire in case, and later on they were cheapened somewhat, albeit made more easily, by the addition of a round sapphire. So these early examples are the most desirable, the rarest, and I should mention, it represents pretty much the watch that Roger Dubuis himself wore. So this is often known as the Roger, and this particular style is hallowed by his own wrist. Nice piece. I've got my Zin. You guys already know it. Okay, let's jump straight in.
Let's dig in.
Yeah.
One of the first times we've actually done a theme branded show.
That's true. Everything on the table is Panerai, but no two are alike. Let's start with by far the most complicated watch on the table. Let's talk a little bit about the 335.
Okay, so the PAM 335 initially came out at SIHH 2010, but a little bit of the backstory of this watch is that in 2009, they came out with the PAM 317, a still black ceramic case. However, it was a chronograph movement featuring a PVD-coated movement. So what was so unique about that watch, though, was actually the complicated nature of how hard it was for Panerai to deliver that watch. And I believe to this day, they never fully even delivered all 500 of those pieces. So believe it or not, the harder than drilling the holes in that chronograph was actually PVDing the movement so that it would pass Panerai's quality control. So 2010 comes along, you've got the PAM 335 gets launched with the black ceramic case, no longer a chronograph, so it's the same as the PAM 270. And instead of a PVD-coated movement, you actually have a dark gray back crystal there that gives the impression as if it's a PVD-coated movement. So a really ingenious way of the brand and the watchmakers to still have that overall aesthetic, but not have the complication of it not passing quality control. So for me, this is quintessential Panerai, everything that made the brand great in that heyday period. And for me, one of my favorite Panerais to date.
This is an awesome watch on a lot of fronts, and I would also say this is probably not a Panerai purist's first or only Panerai. This is a complication, which means it sets itself apart from the mass of Panerai watches on that basis alone. But you've got the 10-day power reserve with the power reserve indicator at the date, the second time zone, the AM/PM coaxial indicator, and I'll try to show you this. It actually sits on one register over at 9 o'clock that also includes a seconds hand. So you can see that right there, as well as the stub second time zone. The watch has immense endurance, 10 days. If it's not going to be your only Panerai, if you are a collector, this is a great option because you only need to wind it once every 10 days to keep it active. The case is indelible. Ceramic is manna from heaven for those who hate to refinish watches or who wonder when buying a pre-owned watch whether it's been refinished. With ceramic, there is no need, no scratches, no scuffs, no refinishing, and you still get that iconic Luminor profile with the device protecting the crown. Also impressive, the combination of sapphire, ceramic, and titanium on the case back means that this is a very light watch in spite of its size. So if you want all the bells and whistles and toys, as well as a Cadillac power reserve, this is a great way to get it in a watch that's pretty close to indelible. Scratch-proof, scuff-proof. It wouldn't be my choice to bang against a stone wall, but this is going to be a durable watch and an uncommonly complicated option from Panerai.
And a few other features is that both the 317 and the 335 both featured, it was a PVD-coated titanium caseback. and the pusher guard there is actually ceramic as well, as opposed to PVD coated steel. So just a couple features on the watch that are interesting and unique, and again, I'm a big fan of the watch, and for me, it's what I love about Panerai.
Awesome. 3 mainspring barrels strong. Plus, you gotta love the bubble of the sapphire that's designed to evoke a plexiglass. But I'm gonna show you the real thing right now, because I've got an actual plexiglass Panerai. This is also not likely to be a first or only Panerai, unless you are that guy who otherwise wouldn't touch the brand, in which case the Panerai Radimir 1940 PAM 791 is right up your alley. The model that's also known as the Art Deco. It was built for 2018, inspired by an Art Deco 1930s clock in a Panerai gallery. As you can see, everything about this watch is vintage inflected, and it is very different from the standard fare. It's not a sausage dial, it's not a dimple dial, it's not a stencil or a sandwich dial. It is a remarkably handsome, urbane, refined, and upscale look. It has a lovely vintage vibe to it, but this is not vintage Panerai 3646. This is very much a timepiece that splits the difference between an oversized sports watch and a dress watch. Now let me show you one of my favorite features here. You have the time zone function that allows you to step the hour hand independently. Note that both of the hands feature blackening, so they've been black oxidized to stand out against the dial base. The watch also has that lovely warm warbling off-axis distortion of plexiglass, and this is the real thing. Again, that's a nod to history. This watch is a hodgepodge of historical cues, so it's not a purist's Panerai, but it is a lovely and impressive 47mm stainless steel. 100 meters water resistant. You could swim with this one. Throw it on the wrist. You can see the presence it has. It really does pop thanks to the light color of the dial, and the cream coloration with the black and gold accents is perfect. This is an ambitious watch by Panerai, and it's a timepiece that stands apart. If your objection to Panerai was always the clone culture, everyone looks like all the others, then this is the antidote to the common PAM. Flip it over, 3-day power reserve, and you can see it is a gorgeous caliber P3000. It's actually the 2nd generation P3000 because you have these individual fingers in the train, so you have finger bridges for the drivetrain, leading to a balance that beats away at 21.6. 3-day power reserve, twin mainspring barrels, manual wind, and you can see that it's nicely decorated with a satination across the bridges designed to evoke the Rolex Codebert and Angelus SF240 pocket watch movements historically used on Panerai watches. Free sprung with a full balance bridge. It's also very shock tolerant. And as you can see, no cheapening of the firmament right here. We have traditional screws and bars fixing the strap to the case. So if you're old school Paneirista and you already have your screwdriver kit, you're good to go. You're ready to start strap swapping. I love this piece. This is probably my favorite Panerai.
It's amazing when you see the progression of how they are focusing more, as you had said, having those vintage vibes in the watches and putting more and more of those cues in the pieces as time went on.
You'll also note that the contrasting stitch of the strap is a perfect match for the colors of the dial. So this is a real holistic design effort, very different from standard Panerai fare, but in my opinion, unmistakable and alluring in a way a standard PAM 111 or 104 never would be.
Correct. No, and you can obviously see the focus of creating watches that, as you had mentioned, differentiate themselves from the other Panerais, so that for those that were collecting Panerais or that had multiples, they felt like they were getting a different watch. And that's really important, right? As you started amassing these pieces, and there's that feeling that they blended together by creating, call it the 1940s case or the unique dial. It was a way for somebody to get into a watch and have it completely different than the rest of their collection.
A real good shift of gears for Panerai, because where Panerai generally succeeds with variations is when it uses different materials or colors or hands or typeface. Where it generally fails is when it tries to go haute de gamme, high-end, or very complicated.
Correct. So I feel like this is a good piece to talk about here. So here we have the PAM 590, and this watch came out in 2014. It was a North America limited edition. And 2014, I think, was a heyday period for Panerai. The brand was on absolute fire. This was one of the first times that call it limited edition, not the first time a limited edition was done, but that a limited edition of this size was done for one market for Panerai. So you've got the 44mm case, let's call it key thing about this watch is that this watch was built for the collector. They were targeting the Panerai collector, guys that liked nuanced changes to the dial. The biggest one here being the Arabic 3 being replaced by the, I'm going to have you read it so that I don't butcher the word.
Yeah, as you can see, you've got Auto Giorni Brevetato.
Which means 8-day patented. So this watch features an 8-day power reserve, which was inspired by, or I guess purported to have been inspired by the Angelus 8-day movement. So, you know, why don't you talk a little bit about the history of what that represents for the brand?
I think what you're looking at here is a fusion of two different nostalgias. Now, this is an interesting watch on a couple of levels, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But fundamentally, it's taking the most charismatic historic Panerai dial, which is the 8-day patent 6152, the watch that effectively became the design basis for the modern Luminor. That watch came out during the 1950s. It used the 8-day manual wind Angelus SF240 pocket watch caliber. It had the 8-day patent signature, and of course, it lends its unmistakable crown guard to this model. But the thing is, that watch had a very different case shape. So while the crown guard is familiar and the dial is familiar, the case shape here plays to a different kind of nostalgia than the dial. This is a watch that is essentially a nod to the early Paneristi, the guys who were attracted to that original Alessandro Betterini case. Alessandro Betterini was a machinist with Panerai Sistemi, which created the original 3 Panerai civilian watches in 1993, the Luminor Marina, and the Mare Nostrum. And this squared off, almost tuna can-like case profile is what Betterini created for the civilian market. So the case itself is evocative of the 90s, and the dial is evocative of the 50s. And we can even go one step further and say the case back is evocative of the 1940s, as that is the SLC, the Maiale, the manned torpedo used by Italian Navy combat swimmers, most notably in the raid on Alexandria during World War II. But you can see the 2 frogmen on the torpedo, and they would use not only Panerai watches, but also Panerai submersible compasses and depth gauges. So you have 3 different threads of Panerai history coming together in this watch with the 8-day manual wind caliber. One more note, this has a really nice strap. The strap has an almost crinkly look and a feel to match, and it is a new strap. You can see it's brand new, no gouging, no crimping, but it has a wonderful distressed and aged simulated surface.
Look at the strap is too.
I love it. Yeah, look at that. They are not shorting you the leather. My goodness. That's almost a 1/4 inch thick. Nice piece, good choice.
Thank you.
All right, now we got 2 different takes here on smaller Panerai watches, but before we go small, we're going to go big. And we're going big with the PAM 616, the Carbotech, the first Carbotech. When this came out in 2015, I thought home run. Mostly because I love the look of the color scheme and I love the grain of the carbon fiber, but also because historically when Panerai variations are successful, they tend to be things like the Bronzo, like the Carbotech, watches that are fundamentally the same design, but innovating with color variations and case material variations. There's no minute repeater, there's no tourbillon, there's no chronograph here. This is a Luminor submersible with a 1950 case profile, and you can really see how that case is different from the PAM 590. I'll show them side by side. You can see the Betterini versus the 1950. You can see how much more contoured the 1950 case is. But you're basically taking the Panerai Luminor submersible and you're adding this Carbotech material, which because it is layers of carbon fiber held together by a resin and then autoclaved, no 2, like a tree trunk, no 2 have exactly the same pattern. And you can see that the combination of color here, although admittedly a bit of a pander with the faux Tina, it actually works because the black, the gray, the ecru or off-white of the faux Tina and the blue accents simply explode off the wrist. And though this is a 47mm watch, in titanium, sapphire, and carbon, it wears light. I could and would wear this watch. It's a diver, rotating bezel, ISO 6425, and of course 300 meters water resistant. It's got that caliber 9000 automatic inside, so you get that same time zone skipping hand as the 791, but you also get stop seconds and small seconds, which are necessary in order for this to be a dive watch. As Brian mentioned with the 335, it's always nice when Panerai makes the entirety of the watch from the same material. So the crown guard structure is also carbon, and so is the bezel. And if you want to hear the best diving bezel in the business, listen to this. chunky, mechanical, visceral. It's raw, and I love it. That's the best diving bezel sound in the business. This one too, with the Solora Alonta Corsa on the reverse side, that manned torpedo, and of course the name of the origin city of what was originally a clock and watch dealership in Florence, eventually becoming the Panerai watch manufacturer and Panerai Sistemi after that. So this is a cool piece. This is controversial. Where do you stand?
So when they first launched this watch at SIHH, everybody knew that this was a winner. You know, as you had mentioned, you had the Fotina that at the time was incredibly popular, the light blue accents. As far as the case size goes, you know, case sizes have trended down a little bit since then, but at the time, 47 millimeter was right in line with where watches were being made. I think forged carbon overall had fallen a little bit out of favor as opposed as a material to use. And coming out with something actually, in my opinion, better looking and different than ceramic, which everybody was using at the time, was very smart. So the watch itself is beautiful, the color scheme is beautiful. It couldn't have come out at a better time for Panerai. And this really, in my opinion, other than the Bronzo, relaunched the Submersible for the brand.
And guys, remember, if you're new to the program or you've never heard my videos before, my wrist is 16 centimeters circumference, so you really get a good sense of this. This is a real diver. The nice thing too about this material is that it tends to cover up scratches and scuffs because it has so many striations and marks in the grain of the carbon.
And what was interesting about this watch as well is that I think it pulled a different consumer to the brand. You know, AP was making their 44 millimeter offshores. They were obviously far more expensive than this watch, but I think that consumer started looking at Panerai in a different way, and this attracted that consumer to come into the brand, and I thought that was a really good move on their part, and you know, again, just an incredibly well executed watch. And you know that it did well because now there's Carbotech everywhere.
That's a fact. And I actually like this better than the all blue 16. I actually think this is better than the version that superseded it. Now let's talk about a watch that's controversial in its own way, because when the Luminor Due arrived, a lot of folks said Panerai had no business creating a dedicated dress watch. Now this model right here is the 676 in 42 millimeters. It has a 60-hour manual wind caliber. It maintains the crown guard profile of the Panerai Luminor, and that's a key difference between this and what Brian's about to show you. This watch is only 10.7 millimeters thick, so if you wanted a compact Panerai for a smaller wrist or a more elegant or formal sensibility, this watch is certainly that. It has a sandwich dial with an explosive ardoise or gray metallic sunburst, and it does have that Fotina to add a little bit of warmth to an otherwise strikingly bright steel and gray watch. Now when you turn it over, you can see why a lot of horological purists really love manual wind calibers, because this one is broad, open, and does nothing to obscure your view of the mechanism. 60-hour power reserve, manual wind, very tough with a full bridge and a free sprung balance. This is a timepiece that offers grace that is not necessarily endemic to the Panerai model family. It also gives you that iconic crown guard profile and design, because even covering up the whole watch, you know exactly what you're looking at. That is iconic design. But Brian, there's one shortcoming of this watch that is not shared by the timepiece you're about to present. This is a true dress watch, water resistant to 30 meters. We're about to see one water resistant to 100, also 42.
Okay, so here we have a Radimir 1940 in the 42 millimeter case. And as Tim mentioned, these watches were designed for the customer that wanted a slightly smaller Panerai, something that they could wear under a cuff that wasn't as large as a Submersible or a Luminor. And I really do think that they did a nice job. So you have a stark white dial, you have the Fotina that was featured in the other watch. What differentiates this watch from the other, obviously you don't have the crown guard, but you do have a screw down crown, and you have a P4000 caliber micro-rotor movement there. So for me, you know, them transitioning to the Radimir with the lugs, with this slim profile, really created an entire new type of watch for the brand. And I also think brought along a consumer who was a little hesitant to wear a larger or 44 millimeter Panerai and try something that was a little bit smaller. This watch also happens to do well in the ladies collection.
And I would say what I love about this compared to the Due is that you get a real 100 meter water resistance here. So while it is perhaps more elegant, more formal, less bombastic than the bigger Panerai watches, it's just as capable. Throw it on something other than this assolutamente strap, something rubber perhaps, or textile, you can take this swimming. So it's got automatic winding, but without the thickness of automatic winding. It has the grace of a dress watch without the delicacy of a dress watch. And it's everything a Panerai should be, as this is a no-date dial-first type watch that's defined by the combination of its case profile and the legibility of its dial day or night. My favorite feature of this dial, and it's a subtle one, if you look real close, you can see that there is actually a transferred black border framing each of these ecru indices outside of the numerals, and that little black border helps the indices to pop in their own right. With blackened hands for contrast, this is still a very viable and practical watch. Stainless steel.
So if you can only choose one, which one are you picking?
If I can only choose one on this table, I'm absolutely going for the 791. It's crazy. It's a crazy watch. It's gorgeous. It's big, but it's wearable. And at the end of the day, it's completely unique. There's only ever been two Panerai watches like that, the 790 with a black dial and that 791.
The Art Deco numerals are absolutely beautiful. For me, it would be the 335. I love the black ceramic case. I love the textured strap that comes with it. For me, just the overall look. And there's not many all black ceramic watches that I would wear, but this happens to be one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's complication rich. If you are a collector, you have more watches in your rotation than I do in the 10-day power reserve, especially when you've got 2 time zones. It really comes in handy because there's no resetting to worry about.
Highly luminescent, so, again, just happy that we did a show, by the way, on one brand.
Yeah. This will continue. Comment below on what you'd like to see for our future themes. Remember, team also at thewatchbox.com for purchase and pricing details, or reach out to Brian at thewatchbox.com. I'm Tim, he's Brian. Time out, Tim out, Brian out, and thanks for logging on.